Welcome to this deep dive. We are going to be looking at how critical thinking can help us protect ourselves from the influence of cults. We got some really cool stuff. We're going to look at some excerpts from books like 13 Easy Steps to Improve Your Critical Thinking Skills and Combating Cult Mind Control. We're going to be looking at academic papers, and we even have a historical collection from Margaret Singer, the renowned cult expert. So by the end of this, you should be pretty well equipped to spot the tactics used by cults and other high-control groups to manipulate people, and even more importantly, stay true to yourself.
Yeah, it's really pretty amazing how important these skills are. Even outside of just thinking about cults, critical thinking is like a superpower these days.
It really is. So let's dive into this. What are some basic critical thinking tools anyone can use? I know 13 Easy Steps to Improve Your Critical Thinking Skills has a few tips that I thought were good starting points.
One of the most basic things you can do is question the source of information. It sounds really simple, but people often just accept whatever they see or hear without really thinking about, who's saying it and why they might be saying it.
Right. So instead of just blindly accepting a news headline or, something on social media or whatever, we need to stop and think, okay, who's behind this message and what are they trying to get me to believe or to do?
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it because every source has a perspective, right? They've got their own biases and they've got reasons for presenting information in a certain way. And if you can understand that that's a key part of thinking critically.
That makes a lot of sense. Questioning the source. That's a good first step. What else can we do to sharpen our critical thinking?
Another important skill is considering multiple viewpoints. Even if a source seems credible, they're still presenting their side of the story right.
Yeah, it's like getting a second opinion from a doctor. Just because one doctor says one thing doesn't mean you shouldn't look for other opinions.
Exactly. You want to get the whole picture, not just one little piece of the puzzle.
Mhm.
And if you seek out different perspectives, it can really open your eyes.
For sure. So questioning the source and considering other perspectives, those sound like simple things, but they could help us deal with the flood of information we all face every day.
Yeah, definitely. Think about it from when you wake up and check your phone, to scrolling through social media, to watching the news. You're just constantly bombarded with messages that are trying to get you to think a certain way or do a certain thing.
Yeah, it's almost like a battle for our minds.
You could say that. And that's where critical thinking is so important. It helps us see these attempts to influence us and lets us make choices based on reason and careful thinking, not just our emotions or, clever marketing tactics.
So critical thinking is like our mental defense system
Oh,
against
right.
manipulation, not just from cults, but all kinds of persuasive messages.
Exactly. It helps us tell the difference between what's true and what's false, helps us see people's biases, and in the end, it helps us make decisions that are good for us.
So speaking of manipulation, how do cults use these sophisticated psychological techniques like thought reform to control people?
Yeah, thought reform is a scary process. Margaret Singer, was a pioneer in this field, really helped us understand cult dynamics, and she spent a lot of her career exposing these techniques that cults use. It's not about physical force, it's more about systematically breaking down a person's identity and then replacing it with the ideology of the group.
It sounds terrifying. So are they kidnapping people and, brainwashing them in a secret lab or something?
No, not really. It's a lot sneakier than that. Singer's research, especially her collection of historical materials, goes really deep into this. Cults use a bunch of different techniques. They often start with what they call love bombing, where they just shower potential recruits with affection and attention, to make them feel really special and accepted.
So they create this feeling of belonging and acceptance. That makes it really hard to leave.
Right. And as the person gets more and more involved, the cult will slowly isolate them from their friends and family and anyone else who might question what the group believes. And when someone's isolated like that, they depend more and more on the cult for, validation and information.
It's scary. It's like they're cutting the person off from the real world and creating a whole new reality.
It's a very controlled environment designed to make the person totally dependent on the group. Singer's work also shows that certain types of people are more likely to be drawn into these situations.
Oh, really? Who are the people most at risk?
She found that a lot of the people who get sucked in are young adults, middle class and upper middle class. They're often idealistic, looking for meaning and purpose in their lives. And cults know how to exploit that.
I can see that. The world can feel pretty chaotic. So a group that offers simple answers and a sense of belonging. It's easy to see how that could be appealing.
Exactly. They prey on that desire for certainty and belonging. And the cult leader will often present themselves as having all the answers. Like they have this clear path to enlightenment or salvation or whatever it is their ideology promotes.
Wow. It's like a trap, a carefully designed trap that plays on our deepest desires and vulnerabilities.
And the effect this can have on a person can be really devastating. Cults can end up controlling every part of someone's life, their sex life, their relationships, how they spend their money, even their thoughts.
It's like their individuality is being erased and replaced with the identity of the group.
That's a good way to put it. They break down the person's sense of self and then rebuild it in the image of the cult.
And I imagine leaving a cult must be incredibly difficult. It's almost like starting your life over from scratch.
It can be incredibly challenging, yeah. You're not just leaving a group, you're leaving behind a whole set of beliefs and a sense of community, and a lot of times your whole social network.
It's no wonder people who leave cults often have a hard time psychologically and struggle to fit back into society.
Exactly. And that's why recognizing the warning signs early on is so important. Singer's work helps us understand these tactics and gives us the tools to protect ourselves and other people from falling into these traps.
Yeah, it is pretty scary to think about how these groups take advantage of people. It makes you wonder if there are ways to help people who are already trapped in a cult.
Oh, there's definitely hope. Even if someone has already been indoctrinated, there are ways to help them get their critical thinking skills back. Combating cult mind control has this really interesting story about how the author got involved with the Moonies and how he was able to eventually break free.
His story really shows that it can happen to anyone, even someone who's intelligent and well-adjusted. What was it about the Moody's that drew him in the first place?
Like a lot of people who join cults, he was looking for meaning
Yeah.
and answers. He wanted to feel like he belonged. The Moonies are like a lot of these groups. They go after people who are at a turning point in their lives. And they offer them this tempting mix of certainty and community.
Yeah, it's like they offer a shortcut
Yeah.
to dealing with the complexity of life.
Exactly. And that can be so appealing, especially when you're feeling uncertain or like your life is in chaos. It's interesting how the author describes his experience, how he slowly began to realize that things weren't what they seemed.
So how did he get out? Was it a sudden realization, or did it happen more gradually?
I think it was a combination of things, but one of the most important was that he had access to information from outside the group. He started questioning what they were telling him, and he started comparing it to what he was learning from other sources.
Yeah, it's like a little crack in their facade, letting in a bit of light from the outside.
That's a great way to put it. And as he started questioning more, that spark of critical thinking started to come back. He could see the holes in what the Moonies were teaching, and he started recognizing how they were manipulating people.
That's really inspiring. It shows that critical thinking is still there, even after someone has been brainwashed, and it can be brought back. What happened to him after he left the Moonies?
Well, his experience actually led him to become an exit counselor. He dedicated his life to helping other people escape from cults. He tells this really powerful story about a young man named George, who was completely caught up in this really destructive group.
Wow, that's incredible. I can imagine it takes a really special kind of person to be able to do that kind of work. How did he approach George?
He emphasizes that patience and understanding are really important. You can't judge the person, it's not about making them see things your way. It's more about gently helping them to start thinking for themselves again.
So instead of directly attacking what George believed, he created a space where George felt safe. So he can explore his own doubts and connect with his own inner voice.
Exactly. He understood that if he came on too strong or judged George, it would just push him deeper into the group. So he focused on building a relationship, listening to George's point of view, and offering him alternative information, but without any pressure or judgment.
That's such a compassionate approach. I can see how that would be much more effective than trying to argue with someone. So what were some of the key moments for George? What helped him finally break free?
One really important thing was showing him information that contradicted what the group was teaching. He brought in former members who had escaped, and they shared their stories with George, so he could see things from a different perspective.
Like showing him the other side of the coin, helping him see the whole picture.
Exactly. And hearing those stories firsthand from people who had gone through the same thing and made it out, that gave George a sense of hope. It made him believe that escape was actually possible.
It's so powerful to hear those stories, to know you're not alone. What else happened? What were some of the other key moments in George's journey?
Another important part was encouraging George to reconnect with what he believed before he joined the group. The author asked him things like, "What were your dreams before you got involved? And What things do you really value in life?
like helping him rediscover those parts of himself that had gotten buried under the group's beliefs.
Exactly. It's a process of stripping away all the layers and helping them rediscover who they really are, the person they were before they were influenced by the cult.
I bet that's a really emotional experience.
It is. It's not just about leaving a group. It's about reclaiming your life and your identity and the ability to make your own choices. It's realizing that you have the power to choose your own path.
George's story also shows how important it is to trust your instincts. A lot of times people who get involved with cults, they've been ignoring those little warning
Ah,
signs all along the way.
You're totally right. It's that voice inside you that says, something just doesn't feel right here. We all need to learn to pay attention to those feelings, those doubts. They can help protect us from being manipulated.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about critical thinking and how it can help us avoid cults and other manipulative groups.
Mm.
But how can these skills help us in other areas of our lives? We're not exactly running into cult recruiters on every street corner.
You're right. But in today's world, we're surrounded by messages that are trying to influence us. Think about the constant stream of information and opinions that we're exposed to every single day.
Oh, yeah, for sure. From the moment we wake up and check our phones, we're bombarded with news headlines
Yeah.
and social media posts
Mm.
and ads.
Yeah.
And everyone's got an opinion about everything. It can be really overwhelming.
Exactly. And if we don't have good critical thinking skills, we can get swept away by all of it. We might make decisions based on how we feel, or impulsive reactions, or even just, clever rhetoric, instead of taking the time to evaluate the information and consider all sides of the story.
It's like trying to swim in a stormy ocean without a life jacket. Critical thinking is that life jacket. It helps us stay afloat and make decisions.
That's a perfect way to put it. It helps us see through propaganda and recognize biases and not fall for misinformation.
So it's about being more aware of how we're consuming information. We can't just passively absorb everything we see and hear.
Exactly. It's about questioning assumptions
Mhm.
and challenging the status quo
Mm.
and forming our own opinions based on reason and evidence, not just blindly accepting what we're told.
It's about thinking for ourselves instead of letting other people think for us.
And that's really important, not just for avoiding cults, but for dealing with all the complexity of modern life.
So how do we develop these critical thinking skills? Are we born with them, or is it something we can learn?
It's definitely something you can learn and get better at, just like any other skill.
Okay, so where do we start? What are some practical things we can do to build up those critical thinking muscles?
A lot of the basics we've already talked about apply here. Asking questions, looking for different perspectives, and being careful about where your information is coming from. Those are all good starting points.
So it sounds like it all starts with curiosity. Instead of just taking things at face value, we need to be willing to explore and question things and learn more.
Exactly. And that includes being willing to question what we believe, even when it makes us uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we might be wrong, or that our perspective might be limited, and that there's always more to learn.
Yes. And that can be tough for some people. It's often easier to just stick with what we know, even if it's not completely accurate.
Yeah, I get that. It's human nature to gravitate towards information that confirms what we already believe, but that can also lead to blind spots and keep us from seeing the big picture.
Exactly. The real growth happens when we push ourselves, when we step outside of our comfort zones, and when we really consider new ideas and perspectives, even if those ideas challenge our most basic beliefs.
So it's a journey of constantly learning
Mhm.
and looking at ourselves and being open to new possibilities.
It is. And it's a journey that's worth taking. Critical thinking helps us live more authentically and fulfilling lives based on reason and open to new things.
And that brings us to the topic of raising critical thinkers. How do we teach kids these skills? I know Helping Your Child with Critical Thinking has some interesting ideas about this.
It's a great book. It says it's important to create an environment where kids feel safe asking questions and expressing their opinions and challenging ideas without being judged or criticized.
So instead of just giving kids the answers, we need to encourage them to explore and question and figure things out for themselves.
Right. It's all about encouraging their natural sense of wonder and giving them the tools to become independent thinkers and learners.
One way to do that is to ask open-ended questions that get them thinking. Instead of just giving them the answers, we can guide them to find those answers on their own.
Exactly. Like instead of saying the sky is blue, you could ask, why do you think the sky looks blue? That way they're learning to observe things and analyze them and draw their own conclusions.
It's about making them active participants in their own learning, not just passive recipients of information.
Exactly. And these skills will help them far beyond school. They'll be better able to deal with life's challenges, make good choices, and resist being manipulated.
It's about raising a generation of kids who can think critically and solve problems in creative ways and be part of a more informed and engaged society.
Yes. And it all starts with helping them develop these critical thinking skills early on. It's a gift that will last them a lifetime.
So in a nutshell, critical thinking isn't just about avoiding cults or spotting fake news. It's about being more aware and more discerning and ultimately more in control of our minds and our lives.
I like that. It's about thinking smart and staying safe. Not just from dangerous groups, but from all the misinformation and manipulation that's out there. It's about taking control of our own thinking and making choices that align with what we believe in.
And it's something that we have to work at, a continuous process of learning and looking at ourselves.
Definitely. The more we use these critical thinking skills, the stronger they become, and the better we get at dealing with the challenges of life.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about. How might those techniques that cults use, like thought reform and undue influence, how might they be present in our everyday lives, in maybe less extreme ways?
That's a really good question. It encourages our listeners to take what we've talked about today and apply it to their own lives and to start to become aware of all the subtle ways people are trying to persuade us.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's not just about cults, right? It's about being able to spot these patterns of manipulation that can show up in all sorts of relationships and situations.
Absolutely. We've got to be on guard and use our critical thinking skills to protect ourselves from being unduly influenced, whether it's a charismatic leader or a pushy salesperson, or even a friend who has good intentions but is, maybe spreading misinformation without realizing it.
So let's get practical for a minute. What are some things people can do in their everyday lives
Yeah.
to get better at critical thinking and become more resistant to manipulation?
One of the most important things is to cultivate what I call a healthy skepticism. Don't just believe everything you hear or read, especially if it's coming from someone who's trying to sell you something or get you to do something.
So like those get-rich-quick schemes or miracle weight loss products,
Well,
kind of stuff that pops up in our inboxes and on social media all the time.
Exactly. If something sounds too good to be true, or it promises a simple solution to a complex problem, that's a red flag right there. You got to stop and ask yourself, okay, what's the real motivation behind this message?
And I guess that goes for information we get from friends and family too. Even people we trust can sometimes pass along misinformation without meaning to.
Right. It's not about not trusting anyone. It's about being careful with information, no matter where it comes from. Think about the source's credibility and any biases they might have, and whether there are other viewpoints to consider.
It's almost like being a detective. You gather evidence, you weigh the different possibilities, and then you come to a conclusion.
I like that. Be curious, ask questions, and try to get the whole picture. Don't just settle for the first version of a story that you come across.
And speaking of asking questions, I know it can be hard to challenge authority figures or go against what everyone else is saying, but sometimes that's what critical thinking demands.
You're absolutely right. It takes guts to speak up when you feel like something's not right, to question the status quo, to disagree with the crowd. But remember, critical thinking is about giving yourself the power to make your own decisions. Decisions based on reason and evidence, not just going along with what everyone else is doing.
It's about having the confidence to think for yourself, even if it means standing out from the crowd.
Exactly. And that's a really valuable skill, not just for avoiding cults, but for navigating life in general.
Okay, so we're being skeptical. We're asking questions.
Yes.
What else can we do to get better at critical thinking?
Making an effort to get different perspectives is so important. Don't just surround yourself with people who agree with you all the time. You've got to expose yourself to a variety of viewpoints, even ones that make you question your own beliefs.
I could see how that could be uncomfortable, especially if someone's challenging something you feel really strongly about.
It can be. But remember, growth usually happens when we get out of our comfort zone. When we engage with different perspectives, we learn more. We become more aware of our own biases, and our views become more nuanced and well-rounded.
It also helps us be more empathetic and understanding, even when we don't agree with someone.
Right. It's about realizing that there are lots of different ways of looking at the world, and our own perspective is just one of many.
So how do we go about finding those different perspectives?
Oh, there are tons of ways. Read books and articles by people from different backgrounds, listen to podcasts, watch documentaries that challenge your assumptions, talk to people who have had different life experiences than you have.
So it's all about being curious, having an open mind, and actively searching for information that broadens our horizons.
Exactly. Make it a habit to step outside of that echo chamber. Expose yourself to a range of ideas and opinions. It'll make you a better thinker and more resilient to manipulation.
And remember, critical thinking is like any skill. It takes practice. The more you do it, the better you get at it. So make a conscious effort to question and analyze and evaluate information in your everyday life.
That's a really important point. It really is like any other skill. The more you exercise those mental muscles, the stronger and more flexible they become.
And it's so worth it. Critical thinking helps us make better choices, deal with difficult situations more effectively, and live more fulfilling lives. It's a journey everyone should take.
I totally agree. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I just want to emphasize again that these critical thinking skills aren't just about cults, they're about life. They're about giving us the tools to think clearly, make good judgments, and live according to our values in a world where everyone's trying to influence us.
That's a great point. Critical thinking is like a superpower, and it's something we can all develop, and it has the potential to change not just our own lives, but the world around us.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the fascinating world of critical thinking. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those minds sharp.
And until next time, stay curious.